thank you everyone for joining today's session as part of Leeds Digital Festival. It's our BJSS regular event, Agile Surgery. We are recording the session today and we do want you to ask as many questions as you would like to using the Q&A functionality. Without further ado, I will hand over to Charlotte, who will be hosting today's session.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Karen. So hi everyone, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to this, which is our second online BJSS Agile Surgery. We started the Agile Surgery series last year and we're extremely proud of how well it's been going and how popular it's been, and today actually marks our 6th event. We're very excited to have some familiar names back on the list, and also want to extend a warm welcome to all of those who are joining us for the first time. So I'd like to just quickly start by giving the BJSS team a chance to introduce themselves. So I'll start. My name is Charlotte Sutton. I'm a delivery manager and a squad lead at BJSS. I've been with the company for 3.5 years now. Craig?
Hi guys, welcome. My name's Craig Howarth. I'm the capability lead for Agile at BJSS Leeds, and I've been with the organisation there about 6 years.
Thanks, Craig. Mike?
Yep. Hi everyone, I'm Mike Staniowski. I'm the BA capability lead at BJSS. I'm currently also the program lead on one of our large engagements, and I've been at BJSS for about 4 years now.
Thanks, Mike. John?
Thank you. Hello, I'm John Mandeville. I'm one of the BJSS delivery managers. I've been with BJSS in various different forms for probably about 3 to 4 years now. Thank you.
Lovely. Gabriella?
Hi guys, my name is Gabriela Dobre. I'm an IT project manager at BJSS and I've been with the company for a year now.
And Sean?
Hi, I'm a delivery manager with BJSS, been around for about 3.5 years with BJSS.
Lovely. Thanks, guys. So today we are going to share with you some of our experiences on the topic of legacy systems, an impossible agile puzzle. So to get us started, I just want to take a minute to summarise a bit about BJSS and why we feel we're well placed to talk to you about this topic. So BJSS was formed just over 27 years ago. We are still privately owned by the founder and our roots are very much in software delivery. Fast forwarding to BJSS in 2020, we can best be described as an innovative technology consultancy. And what we mean by that is we offer end-to-end delivery from inception through to managed services, and we have a proven track record of working collaboratively with our customers to help them deliver the complex technology solutions that are used by millions of people every day. So effectively, we enable transformation through end-to-end solutions that deliver real results. BJSS has continued to grow rapidly. We are now over 1,500 people worldwide across 13 offices, and our latest announcement was in August that we opened our 13th office in Lisbon. It's fair to say that across all of these offices, our people is what make us different, their knowledge, their experience, and their passion. So at this point, I'm now going to hand you over to Craig. I hope you really enjoy the content and the session and you find it useful. And again, as Karen said, please do feel free to add any questions into the Q&A on the Zoom. Thanks. Craig, over to you.
Great stuff. Thanks, Charlotte. Okay, hi guys. Just going to kick us off with an agenda then, just to set the scene. I'm firstly going to introduce some of the key challenges we face when working with legacy systems, then look at how we might approach tackling them while keeping agile and agility at the front of our minds. I'll then hand you over to some of my colleagues for what's effectively the lion's share of the presentation, who will talk about their real world experiences and how they're able to use agile principles to succeed in difficult legacy environments. As Charlotte mentioned, we'll finally hand over to Gabriella, who's currently compiling your questions, and we'll see if we can't respond to as many as possible before we run out of time. So make sure you're firing those over before the session ends. Okay, so then, why change? Let's talk about why we might want to change these legacy systems. We've collated some of the more frequently found triggers here that drive a need for legacy change, alongside the obligatory relevant dilbert. I'm sure you recognize a bunch of them from your own experiences. In fact, some of you are probably here now because you're dealing with them at the moment on your own projects. Each of these trigger points and each combination of them present their own specific problem, each of which has a whole variety of potential solutions, of course. We're going to talk about some of those today and demonstrate that it's absolutely possible to address them with an agile approach, the all-important keyword. Something many people don't instantly associate, or in fact instantly disassociate with the word legacy. So then, using an agile toolkit, Right. So we've considered what might lead us to want to change a legacy system, and suggested it can be done with agility in mind. But that, of course, begs the question: how exactly? The answer is, as this slide might already suggest, there is no one answer. In fact, the number of answers are so many and so varied that we need to use every tool in our Agile toolbox, modeled here by the little feather in the red cap, to reach the one that's right for us. There are a few key takeaways to note from this slide. On the left, we've a few traditional disciplines, each one of which could be thrown at a problem independently, and often are, to try and solve it. In fact, in our experience, it's really common for teams to try and handle legacy issues very narrowly as exclusively a technology problem. In rare circumstances, this can work out, but we'll always increase our chances of success and reduce our risk profile by combining the tools given to us by all three disciplines into our Agile toolkit. There are a bunch of tool names surrounding our little toolbox here, but there are only a few of very many in totality. Those little continuous themes through our upcoming case studies. For example, we've got transparency, which will, among other things, help ensure a potentially skeptical, entrenched team stay on board by knowing what we're doing and why at every turn. Or strong architecture, which kind of often goes without saying as a key tool when we're modifying or rewriting arcane technologies in the world of legacy. And remember, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to implementing any legacy change. But if we consider the key tenets of agility when drawing up and incrementally adapting our approach, it'll really help us arrive at the one that's right for us. That's what the little guys on the right there represent. With the right priorities in place, we're able to focus on a vision and strategy alongside modernizing the tech, all while giving our people a good working environment where their voice is important. The case studies the guys will soon walk us through demonstrate how that's worked for us in practice. Okay, so to summarize the introduction, and I hope this should be pretty evident at this point, there's no single right approach to legacy change. We'll need to consider all of our organizational drivers, our people, the shape of the organization and its existing culture, and then more besides. It's always, of course, the case when spinning up a new delivery project, but it's worthy of extra emphasis in the world of legacy. Okay, we're going to look at two case studies now where we talk about very different ways in which we've attacked very different legacy change problems. Firstly, a project where we carved off functionality bit by bit, replacing outdated and brittle parts with modern and robust ones until the whole system was up to scratch. Then we'll look at a project where we built modern components in parallel to the old and prepared for a cutover. Okay, I'll now hand us over to Mike, who's going to kick us off.
Okay, thanks, Craig. So yeah, I'm going to cover off an example then of a scenario where we've tackled a legacy system using the approach of incremental change. I'd just start by saying that this approach won't be right for every scenario. It very much depends on the scale of change and the size of chunks that the problem can be broken down into. It also depends on the target end state and the dependencies between different elements of the solution. So you can see from the diagram here, it shows how we started off with a monolithic legacy application and a client that was complaining of many of the pain points we mentioned on the previous slide. The main ones here were that were a priority to tackle were a lack of stability and a lack of ability to scale. This was caused by years of tactical changes and no overall vision or strategy for their architecture. This was made worse by seasonal fluctuations in traffic, in seasonal demand, marketing campaigns, and I guess more recently, the pressures put on the business by COVID as well. Secondly, the inherent complexity in terms of the code base led to slow development, long testing windows, and frequent issues in production. A lot of this could be traced back to tactical solutions, technical debt, and is testament really to continuously building on sand not being a sustainable way forwards. The best analogy one of the team came up with for the code was that turning on the light in the bathroom also unexpectedly rang the doorbell. Ultimately, you're likely to get to a point over time when the rate of change slows down and the approach isn't sustainable any longer. So for this client, it wasn't realistic to pause any new feature development for the medium or long term, and therefore we devised a solution that was aligned with their short-term strategy and allowed us to deliver new functionality using a microservice approach. So this carved out aspects of the legacy system and allowed us to implement something to production iteratively, realizing value sooner both in terms of revenue generation, but also improvements to the non-functional aspects that were proving problematic and limiting their growth. So don't get me wrong, there was still an element of needing to go slower to go faster. As part of the transition, some of the features took longer to implement than they would have done as part of the legacy application, but the long-term benefits outweighed this short-term gain. So one of the key aspects of any change like this is being able to articulate the benefits in real terms. For example, if the feature in question will take 4 sprints to deliver on the new tech instead of 2 sprints on the old tech, then will there be a return on the investment? if the next feature takes 2 sprints instead of 4, it pays for itself within a quarter and then has a positive impact going forwards after that. And the ability to sell that to the business and get people bought into the change is often key to the replacement of any legacy systems. So after we were posed with the problem, we ran an initial discovery period focusing on the key problems to fix. So how do we accelerate the implementation of new technologies, allowing benefits to be realized sooner without spending a fortune stabilizing the legacy system? Ultimately, this would be throwaway work. Could leveraging new capability assist with tackling pain points within the current website landscape whilst creating an alternative approach to shift to a modern tech stack? For example, carving out some elements would relieve strain on what was left behind. And lastly, would evolution of the current platform provide a more efficient approach for incrementally delivering outcomes in line with business priorities? So we used our experience and our Agile toolkit that Craig referred to on the last couple of slides to produce a roadmap of step changes required to tackle the problem. So we made some improvements to the existing delivery approach. It was fine, but it needed fine tuning to give us more efficiency. So like with many organizations, there's often an element of we've always done it that way. Sometimes it can take a bit of time to build trust, and I've generally found the best approach to do this is by demonstrating improvements in reality, starting small. This proves the process and the approach and builds confidence. So strong architecture was required to address some of the technical pain points and to look at how we can break up legacy into smaller, manageable chunks whilst introducing new technology. We used a separation of services approach. The system initially had a lot of internal dependencies and different elements were called in an illogical way that made changes slow and risky. We looked to leverage benefits of the previous investment in front-end technology, investigations by moving to modern UI, a modern UI language where libraries and frameworks already existed. It was also important to consider the skill sets of the existing team to make sure that we could really hit the ground running. So using standardized pipelines and CI/CD model to support the blue-green deployments enabled daytime deployments and frequent releases. This was something that just hadn't been possible in the legacy estate. So support for novel Canary deployments with multiple app versions running side by side was also key to what we delivered. A/B testing was very important to this client, but it had historically been done in a cumbersome way using lots of heavyweight front-end JavaScript. And then lastly, we considered the business priorities to decide when best to deliver to avoid duplication of costs. So for example, making sure we didn't have to build things twice. That said, there were some examples where a priority change was required and we had to change it in the legacy platform and then also factor it into the roadmap for the new tech. The point of caution here is that this can easily result in the goalposts moving further and further away. So as with any change, setting off in the right direction is key. Make sure you give yourself the time to do this and don't start writing code until you're ready to do so. By this, I mean, make sure you've gone through all the Sprint Zero activities in terms of knowing what the path to live looks like, making sure environments are set up, having your NFRs defined, and understand how the new tech stack will be supported alongside elements of the old. Delivery then took the form of a standard sprint model with the usual planning, stand-ups, show and tells, and retrospectives. Once kicked off, I'd also say though, make sure you aren't blind to challenges and improvements. Focus on people and empowerment, get them engaged and involved as early as possible. Keep including listening elements into the process to help continually improve it. Adapt an approach that allows for technical debt to be tackled each sprint. We did this using an 80-20 rule. It didn't have to be utilized, but it ring-fenced some time for the teams to prioritize high priority debt and avoid some of the problems encountered in the old stack. And we initially prioritized the project from a technology point of view, given that this was a key driver, but it was also balanced with the business priorities. I guess it's key as well then to expect fluctuations in your plan and see this as an opportunity to make sure you're continually on the best track. So using this model, it's also important to consider service transition as part of each sprint. You'll likely create a more complex landscape, initially at least, by introducing more technology and systems along with elements of business change. So planning in decommissioning activities is also key. It's not enough to stop using elements of the old system. You need to make sure this is tidied up as you go along to realize the benefits of simpler support and development. So hopefully that goes some way to describing how you can break up a legacy application in a logical way, whilst iteratively delivering change to end up with a set of best of breed solutions. So I'm now going to hand over to John, who's going to talk through a different example.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, so I guess what you'll hear from me now are some commonalities with what you've just described. In so much as the toolkit, I'm going to just talk you through that we used in the example that I'll share. there are differences, and it does depend on where you're using it and in what context as to how the elements might look. But it's true that there's a lot of common tools that you might pick up and use for any engagement, whether it's kind of legacy or greenfield. And back to that question of, are they specifically unique for legacy? Well, the answer is probably no. We'd certainly say no. It's just that you might approach some of the tools that Mike's talked about and I'll talk about in a slightly different way. So you might be thinking a little bit more about how you train people to use them, or getting familiarity, or doing some discovery, some proof of concept type work. And certainly a little bit more effort in selling the benefit of some of these tools we talk about versus them kind of being more intrinsically part of the delivery when you're doing greenfield projects, for example. So what I'm going to talk about, I'm not going to go into any detail, but suffice to say, we are talking about an online banking platform with capability to deliver onto web and mobile devices. And that's kind of the context for which we set ourselves up to deliver a legacy change, but using some agile techniques. And the picture you'll kind of see in front of you, it looks a bit like a jigsaw puzzle, is that with our example, again, similar to what Mike was talking about, there are foundational elements that really are quite common and really don't vary that much. And they're the ones we kind of represent in the pink colours. And then there's those elements that the essence of them you'll find everywhere and everybody will use them, but they'll have really, really different shapes and maybe different kind of feels to them. And they're the blues, the ones where there's more flexibility in how you might use those particular tools. So for our example, the first foundational concept, I think it's probably common to a lot of certainly Agile and a lot of transformational projects, is that strong strong and clear product ownership. For us, in our example, legacy implied a product created over years across many tech stacks. And we found that the why for something was often lost or really, really difficult to locate. And so having a strong role in place for us was absolutely crucial to decide what needed to change, and with the mindset of what's going to give value in this particular challenge that we had. But equally importantly, what could be left alone, and understanding those pieces that needed to be delivered to unlock other pieces. So for us in this example, that role of product ownership was absolutely crucial, and perhaps even more so in a legacy context than something where you're discovering for the first time, because you've got that chance to learn and adapt as you go. So what that meant for us in our example was we through the work of the product owner and the team that they work with, were able to focus on kind of a single thread of features. So a steel thread, if you like, within the legacy product that we could grab and we could transform to not only prove the technology, but also kind of prove out the approach and the difference in approach to delivering that set of customer journeys initially. So, I mean, you might say we arrived at kind of a very similar position to your classic MVP, but we'd come at it from a different angle, a different perspective, in that we're almost pruning away and leaving alone to get to that minimum set, rather than in some cases in newer projects where you'll build from a set of user needs. So yeah, number one, really crucial for us. And the second part of that, I guess, different but complementary, and again, it goes back to that point of a bit of a blended toolkit. There are many tools out there, is a strong underpinning architecture. And Mike's alluded to this in his example, but what we were faced with was legacy technology. And you're often talking about kind of quite monolithic systems, in so much as they perform like a whole function, or there's layers of complexity within each module. And in our case, we found something really, really embedded with legacy systems, different geographies, different localities, with very hard to discover dependencies in some cases. And going back to those trigger points, why we were there, why we were trying to do this piece of work, there was, if you wanted to change, there was a high investment cost in the whole thing. So what we were trying to do, really, what our sort of problem we're trying to solve, was to make it cheaper to change. How we did that in the context of architecture, we use microservices. It is one example of an approach to deal with this, not the only example, but for us, it dealt very well in the context of this particular client, with giving us granular mobile pieces where the dependencies are more transparent, that we could move around, and it worked for this context. Now, it won't work for every context, naturally, and there's lots of good talks about that that you can listen to about microservices and monoliths. But the value we were able to get from the investment in this particular area was that ability to unlock change, and that's really what we're driving out of this one. So the third kind of tool that we picked up, and there were loads of different tools that we used, but I've just focused on a few. But the third one, really tightly coupled to that, that idea of microservices, was automation. So automation being part of your engineering or your test practice. And in our example, it just wasn't there at the offset, and very often isn't for legacy technology. And so negotiating that to become part of the delivery lifecycle and the engineering practice was really important. So again, going back to those trigger points, you combine automation with microservices. What we were aiming at was trying to unlock the future ability to deal with hot fixes, whereas that was very risky and problematic at the time we first faced this challenge. So building that assurance into the development practice just helped us manage risk up front, so that we knew when change took place, errors got trapped more reliably with a little extra effort, but not much. But it is fair to say in this particular area that the first iterations were not always quick. And Mike alluded to this about the sort of pace of change, but we tried to focus on delivering some value early, but the idea was to slow down to speed up. And it's probably a phrase you've heard before, but try and get those foundational elements in place. And that's what we did, so that every future change was more rapid and more kind of flexible. So moving into those blue areas on this sort of jigsaw puzzle, and these are items which you will find commonality, and we do across a lot of different product deliveries and projects, but the ideas behind them are the same, but the way they get implemented are very different. And so synchronization as a concept is one of those, and it's not a technical challenge as such. So again, back to that idea of the blended toolkit, but it was focusing on the fact that not only do you need technology, but you need people to support the change. Because naturally shifting legacy technology can be pretty hairy if you don't consider and consult and involve the people who've helped it to get there. And so that was absolutely crucial for us. So our goal was to increase transparency through our practices, some processes and frameworks, and just behaviors that kind of help support people working together. And in this particular example, there were a lot of teams. So we got involved in using SAFe. And again, similar to microservices, there are other practices out there. But this particular one suited the client, and the teams that were there had already worked with it. And we knew how to use it. So it fitted. But the underpinning idea was that we'd use the framework to help teams and people have that common goal. So we used daily scrums, scrums, regular demonstrations and reviews, and kind of continual feedback to the product owner, to just really build in that practice of failing faster together, therefore fixing faster together and more cheaply. And the flip side of that is, of course, achieving success at the same pace, versus it being kind of a sequential activity that you might undertake where you find out about the problem towards the end of the work, have to go back and start again. And of course, there's more cost involved in that. So on to the last two elements that we've got in this example. Again, blue, because they vary hugely between the example that I would describe and what Mike might describe to you. But focusing back to why you might use these tools, the triggers are the kind of things where you say, well, we can't respond to the market quickly enough. So we hooked into incremental delivery and frameworks that help support that as a really valuable piece of our toolkit, because it allowed us to put in place and reinforce discipline, so sprints, and the right roles with your product owners and your development team to deliver those small chunks together, and reinforce the practice of kind of inspecting often. In our case, it didn't mean straight to live. That wasn't the initial purpose and statement of intent. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But what we tried to do was deliver into a state where, almost like a pre-prod state, where you could compare what you've got in that state to what you already know about your production, and you can see whether you've got the right outcomes in a safe manner. So the second aspect to that was kind of building into our engineering practice the ability to deliver small, deliver often, into a pipeline with automated checks, balances, gates, call them what you will, but largely giving us that easy ability, and that's a key word here for us, to kind of check quality and produce something that could be inspected regularly without extra effort every time. And again, by doing that kind of approach, we were trying to manage that risk of change carefully, not make too many big leaps forwards in the product at once. And also by doing that, it meant that if you have challenges, you can roll back much more easily. again, it's fair to say that everything I've talked about fed into the ability to do this. It's kind of a blended toolkit. It would have been ill-advised for us to do one without the other. And I guess that brings me full circle back to how it is, in our opinion, crucial to find your delivery approach, not to copy somebody else's, because everything is unique to the situation that you find. And for us, with this example, we recognise that not all legacy challenges should have been handled at once. It's about prioritisation. So we were faced with kind of a highly complex multi-speed IT organisation. And we thought that just simply applying kind of blindly full inspect, adapt life cycles to production might have actually caused more challenges, because some parts of the organisation weren't ready at that sort of initial time. So we'd agreed those priorities to deal with a lot of the complex issues first. So we dealt with thinner slices, more ownership and synchronization, higher mobility, giving transparency back to the organization, and kind of shape a toolkit that dealt with those initial set of priorities versus just doing it blindly. So for us, I guess the message here is it's about giving that confidence that there isn't only just the one way. There are many different ways you can do it, but equally not to lose sight of those other challenges that you might feel you need to knock down to get to that proper end state where you want to be. So that's it from kind of the example I wanted to share. I think I'm handing back to Craig and Gabriella for a bit of a recap, and then very happy for us all to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. Hi again. Hopefully you've taken something away from today's session already, but just to summarize what's been covered here on this slide, it applies to pretty much every delivery, but especially so in the world of legacy. A strong toolkit is something that you can and should reach into regardless of the challenge. The combination of, and indeed the use of each of these tools, will be specific to your delivery though. As one of my colleagues that want to say, a hammer is a hammer. You can use it to hit nails, or you can use it to damage kneecaps. And the choice is yours, huh? It's tempting to try and boil the ocean and roll a complete top to bottom agile overhaul into your legacy world. It's almost always better though to start with the fundamentals and continuously refer back to them when considering how to attack your issues. Clarity of focus is key here, and in our experience has increased our chances of success across a whole number of engagements. It also means though picking your battles. There'll be quick wins in cases where the cost benefit of making changes is overwhelmingly beneficial, but there'll also be areas and circumstances where it's not worth yet deviating from the legacy norm. Unless they hinder progress to a kind of unreasonable extent, there are some areas better challenged when the core delivery is in a really strong place. Finally, it's a core tenet of Agile and one we should all live by already, but it's again worth remembering that just because this is a legacy overhaul doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to inspect and adapt. If something isn't working for whatever reason, the whole team should always feel empowered to suggest positive change. And that extends to both our old and our new worlds. Okay, thanks again then. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Gabriella, who will walk us through your questions and answers.
Right, so thank you, Craig. Yeah, I think we're now ready to move on to some questions. So we have had a few questions submitted already. So thank you to those who did that in advance. And if you have more, please feel free to add them so we can go through and answer as many as possible in the remaining of the time. Right, so first question then, where did your product ownership come from, BJSS or client? So Mike, are you happy to take that one on?
Yeah, no, I can do, that's fine. So generally, most of our engagements, the product ownership comes from the client. Generally, we're approached by people who understand their own systems and understand their requirements and generally struggle to implement them for whatever reason. So yeah, I mean, we certainly see our role as we'll help to advise on any product decisions and offer our expertise and hopefully add value in that way, as well as sort of our engineering practices. But yeah, generally I'd say that the product ownership comes from the client side in most cases.
Cool. Moving on to the next one. What was the timescale of the project, or like what is normally the timescales of these projects? Mike, John?
Do you want me to,
Yeah.
do you want me to start with that one, John, and you can add anything if you want to?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it varies massively, and it depends on the scale of the change. I mean, I've certainly been involved in replacement of legacy systems that has taken, you know, a couple of months through to a couple of years, and it very much depends on, you know, what's the problem that you're trying to fix. Is this just a small element of the estate that needs to be replaced because it's introducing a rate limiting factor for a certain area of functionality, or is it something more holistic in that, you know what, we started this platform 20 years ago, we've not really modernized it and we've not made improvements, and actually it's time that we need to bite that big bullet and kind of replace everything across the board, in which case that does become a much larger program of work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's fair to say with the example I sort of talked about, the timescale was in part determined by the size of the system we were trying to unpick, but equally we did have this real strong desire to show something working as soon as we could. So yeah, I mean, the overall timescale was quite large, but we were trying to shorten the amount of time it took to get something functional out there for the client to see. So like, I think from memory, and correct if I'm wrong here, Mike, it was something like sort of 3 to 6 months. We're trying to get this thing functioning in its kind of slimmed down form. Because that's quite crucial, isn't it? If you just repeat the same, go away for 3 years and come back, it can be really challenging for somebody to buy into the approach.
Mm-hmm. So tying into timescales, what did you do about new features requests while migrating, and who held the line on the hard decisions? Mike?
Yeah, so I mean, I think in terms of that, it's key to have buy-in from the business and for them to have a really strong understanding of the need for change and the drivers for the change. So I think in terms of you know, controlling the gates, it's a case of this will be a more efficient process if we limit the scope creep as we progress. So I think, you know, at the outset, understanding exactly what you're trying to achieve and being focused on that scope is key. But also, you know, we understand that things change as you progress through a project, particularly if it's going to take, you know, 12 months, 24 months, or whatever that time scale is. You might have to sometimes say, you know what, we are going to develop this on the legacy stack, but then actually we need to build it into the new stack as well, so that we don't regress that functionality when we go live. So yeah, I mean, I think it's we'd always try and avoid adding additional scope as we go through, but actually, you know, in the real world, it's very hard to do that, and you often have to accept those changes as you progress through your plan.
Cool. Next one. So how did the project manage the risk, and was their initial risk assessment done? John, would you like to take that one?
Well, it's always a joy. So being an ex-project manager, a scrum master in the more recent times, and delivery manager, which kind of combines many different disciplines, it's common. I mean, I guess I would go back to those kind of, my original practices and mindset was very much about you setting out up front to predict what was happening up front, and then get the outcome at the end, which may have been sort of 12, 18 months down the line. But the approach we try to take now is very much to think about these risks and these challenges, not just once up front and then keep them in a list, but think about it continually. Trying to understand, of course, at the outset through discovery, what are your key risks, but we operate like a risk-first approach. So we try and deal with, whether it's technical or people risk, try and deal with that as early as we could. And we certainly did with this example I talk about, but build that in and then just continually keep that conversation going. And I was just looking into one of the other questions, which is about Scrum of Scrums and what did that look like and feel like. And we tried to keep that conversation going. It may have been to do with the Scrum Masters having that conversation regularly, but equally, if the problem was technical, the right technical people talking, but that communication being the kind of the focal point for risk management, and then doing something about it is important enough. So I hope that answers the question.
Well, thank you. How do you sell this to clients who don't want to invest in new ways of working? They basically just want to update their tech stack. John?
Oh, I'll get a good one there. I mean, it does come back to, in my opinion, and my opinion may not necessarily reflect the opinion of everybody else, but it does come back to what problems we're trying to solve. We shouldn't, and we try not to go into this going, thou shalt do this because this is the best modern way. It's what problem do you want to solve? Why have you come to us? How can we help you? And engineering from that perspective kind of helps you answer that question by default, you'd hope. That's certainly what we try and do, is what problems we're trying to solve, focusing on those.
Yeah, I think for me, just to add to what John said, it's about, we talk about continuous improvement, and it's technology, but it's process as well. And there's a real danger that, if you just do a one-off, we're going to replace this system, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, you're probably going to find yourself in the same position again, because your processes will regress back to old ways. You'll have built up more tech debt. You'll have stopped sort of, version updates and things like that. So I think it's tricky, but I think it's one that you need to sell the benefits of, how did you get into this position in the first place? What were the behaviors that led to that? What were the shortcomings previously? And how do you avoid those mistakes again? If you want to. Hopefully everyone does want to, because I think these, replacing a legacy system, everyone probably knows and understands that it's not a nice job, and it can be fairly difficult and impactful to the business.
Yes.
So back to that point in the example, sorry to labour the point, but really making sure that people are involved in the journey, because you want to leave a lasting legacy of everybody in the organisation, whether it's us or the organisation themselves, know why that's been done, and it's been part of routine, and then it just becomes a case of practicing it and keeping it going, really.
Cool. So I think this ties in, is kind of the same question, but how do you respond to someone who says, "But we've always done it this way"? Is it the same answer?
I think it is a similar answer. And if someone's always done something in a way and it works, then there's not necessarily a problem. But I think there's always an aspect of taking someone on a journey and opening their eyes to an alternative way. And you might try a different approach and find out that it doesn't work for whatever reason. But I think it's just, it's often a softly kind of approach. I think people are very hesitant when you talk about big bang changes and wholesale changes, and actually the best way to get traction in any organization is to start small and kind of go, what, appreciate you've always done it that way and it works, but maybe there is a better way. Why don't we try this? Why don't we tweak this and see if it makes an improvement? If it doesn't, we can revert back to how we were doing it before. But as I say, I think for me, it comes back to that kind of let's try it. Let's not close the door to anything, and just see if it brings about an improvement. And I think quite often, if you can demonstrate that value and demonstrate those improvements, then it becomes easier the next time you're having that conversation to kind of to sell the change.
Just to add to that, Mike, I think one of the things we talked about in our toolbox was transparency, and a great deal of any agile transformation, whether it's legacy or otherwise, is bringing people along with you. And as long as we sort of maintain that throughout the entire piece, being open to exactly why we're doing things, what exactly it is we're doing, what the benefits we expect to, see out of the other side, and exactly why those people should want to come with us on that journey, rather than us just coming in and sort of, sweeping their jobs away or whatever. That is absolutely key to all of this. And there's a real serious human element that we need to keep in the front of our minds at all times, really.
Charlotte, any more questions?
Yeah, we've had a couple on the Q&A which just look quite interesting. I think it'd be good for the panel to cover. So the first one we've got is, how do you help service owners identify something as a legacy and requiring remediation when in their eyes they've paid good money for it? Who wants to take that? Any volunteers?
Yeah, I'll have a stab. I mean, it's a really good question, and it's tough because there isn't a specific answer, and it's a problem. There's lots of different shades of grey around. Is it legacy? Is it not? And I guess I'd say that if it's not causing you a problem, it's probably not legacy at that point. But I guess there's certain red flags that might help you to understand if it has become legacy and if it does need replacing. If it's a rate limiting factor in your development, or if it's preventing you from implementing functionality that maybe a competitor's been able to implement. If it's something that's going out of support. I think there's lots of different aspects to why might something become legacy. But I guess it comes back to any change that we talk about. It has to add value to be able to justify doing it. And if it's not adding value, then I'd question why we were doing it, and it's probably not legacy at that point.
Lovely, thank you. So the next one is, how did clients reconfigure their engineering and product capabilities along with their ways of working, given that you'd left them with microservices and cloud tooling and a new way of working? John, I think this one popped up while you were talking. So do you want to talk a little bit about the structure of the team there?
Yeah, and so there's probably two sides to this. So how was the world of the people reconfigured? Well, it was, as I said, this particular example, they used a SAFe framework. So, teams were working as small units on particular areas of functionality. in a Scrum type way, but within the SAFe framework. And then you had the sort of the SAFe governance roles in place, the Agile release train owners and that side of things, and then product ownership in there. So in terms of how did we reconfigure, I think this particular client chose a fairly out of the box model for SAFe. But then there's an interesting sort of, I'm not sure if I'm reading this right, we've left them with a set of microservices and cloud tooling. So this was done with, I guess, if I read that correctly, we're concerned there about, you know, somebody coming in, changing the practice and then leaving. I think what we did in our example was we did it with the client, with their organization, to that point about, you know, people are really, really important. We wouldn't have done this on our own and for our own benefit. The way that we worked was trying to work as part of blended teams where that practice becomes kind of embedded. So it's not just someone coming and leaving, it's working together to get a different way of working, and that becomes the norm and that becomes the muscle memory. And that's kind of where we then can leave an organization because they're happy, they can do it, they've solved all their problems, and that's what we tried to do.
Lovely.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I think there's another real danger when you go down that microservice route of a team that's worked on a certain area of the system becomes the SMEs in that area of the system, and before you know it, you've got lots of silos across your delivery teams. So something that we'd always try and do is cycle people between different teams as far as possible, so you've got that knowledge transfer happening on quite a fluid basis, so that, you know, if there is a support issue or something that comes up, you're not tied to a couple of people, you've got more breadth of knowledge across the teams. And that is really difficult. It is really painful to begin with because you do get a dip in your velocity because actually people are learning about different areas of the system. But actually, once you've been able to do that over a few cycles, a few quarters, whatever framework you're working with, it becomes much easier. And actually a lot of your prioritization, your resourcing conversations then get easier because you've got more options in terms of who can work on which new features and things like that.
Lovely, thank you. So just being conscious of time, I think that's probably all the questions we're going to be able to fit in for today. So Gabriella, do you want to do the wrap up for us?
So we're almost out of time, guys. And just to confirm to everyone that today's presentation has been recorded, and we will send out the details after the session, perhaps some point tomorrow. If you want to see other similar events that we're hosting, please visit our BJSS Leeds Digital Festival page. There's some exciting stuff going on there. And lastly, I just wanted to thank everyone that took the time out of your busy day to join us today. Thank the team for putting this great content together. And thank you all. And please stay safe these days.
Thanks, everyone.